Hello everyone! So for today, I'm going to discuss Republic Act number 10173 or the Data Privacy Act. So Data Privacy Act is an act protecting individual personal information in information and communication system in the government and the private sector, creating for this purpose a National Privacy Commission and for other purposes. So, this act is designed para i-protect ato ang mga personal information like our names, addresses, our phone numbers, our birthday when it is collected, stored, or shared by government, agencies, private, and others. So, this law is important kay makahelp na siya to safeguard our individual privacy, builds trust in online transactions, and promotes responsible data handling, especially in today's digital age. So, protecting our personal data is very important too. So, now proceed ta sa definition of terms, which we have first the commission, which refers to the National Privacy Commission created by virtue of this act. So, mo ni siya ang government agency nga responsible for ensuring that our personal data is protected and handled properly, o ang NPC. So, next is the data subject, which refers to an individual whose personal information is processed, which is ikaw, kita, or ako, whose information is being processed. Next is the consent of the data subject, which refers to any freely given, specific, informed indication of will whereby the data subject agrees to the collection and processing of personal information about and or relating to him or her. So, in short, consent means as a data subject, nag-agree ka nga to share your personal information and it's given freely, specific or clear about what information is being shared, and of course informed, you know what you're agreeing to. So, consent shall be evidenced by written, electronic, or recorded means. It may also be given on behalf of the data subject by an agent specifically authorized by the data subject to do so. So next is the direct marketing, which refers to communication by whatever means of any advertising or marketing materials which is directed to particular individuals. This is when companies sends you ads or promotions directly like emails or text messages. So, mo ni siya guys, kung makabantayan ninyo, mo ni siya ang mga emails nga itong receive. So, next is a filing system, which refers to a collection of personal data that is structured or organized in a way that allows for easy access or reference to individuals, in which data is linked to specific individuals or criteria related to them. So, example ani guys is mga paper files organized alphabetically by names, mga folders labeled with mga employee IDs, then databases with searchable fields for specific information. So, a filing system, whether physical or digital, must be handled with care to ensure data protection para ma-safeguard ang atong personal information from unauthorized access and compliance, of course, adhering to data protection laws and regulations. So, next is information and communication system, which refers to a system for generating, sending, receiving, storing, or otherwise processing electronic data, messages, or electronic documents, and includes the computer system or other similar device by or which data is recorded, transmitted, or stored, and any procedure related to the recording, transmission, or storage of electronic data, electronic message, or electronic documents. So in short, An information and communication system is a system that handles electronic data. Example is atom phone, your phone, computer, or online platforms like social media or emails. Muna siya, guys. So next is the personal information, which refers to any information, whether recorded in a material form or not, from which the identity of an individual is apparent or can be reasonably and directly ascertained by the entity holding the information, or when put together with other information would directly and certainly identify an individual. So, ang personal information, guys, mo na siyang maka-identify sa imo like imong names, your address, your phone number, your email, or even your birthday. Mo na siyang personal information. So, next is the personal information controller, which refers to a person or organization who controls the collection, holding, processing, or use of personal information, including a person or organization who instructs another person or organization to collect, hold, process, use, transfer, or disclose personal information on his and her behalf. So, ang personal information controller, guys, mo ni siya ang person or organization nga mag-decide on how your personal information is being used. Example, a company that collects your data for marketing purposes. Yan na. Next is personal information processor or PIP, which refers to any natural or juridical person qualified to act as such under this act, to whom a personal information controller may outsource the processing of personal data pertaining to a data subject. So, a PIP, guys, is an entity nga mag-process sa atong mga personal data on behalf of a personal information controller or PIP. The PIP processes the data according to the PIC's instructions, mag-perform sa tasks such as data storage, analysis, or transmission, and implement security measures to protect our personal data. Next is the privileged information, which refers to any and all forms of data which, under the rules of court and other pertinent laws, constitute privileged communication. So, mo ni siya, guys, ang confidential communication protected by law, such as first, attorney-client privileged information, which is a conversation between a lawyer and a client. Second is doctor-patient privileged information, which is a medical information shared with a doctor. Third is marital privileged communication, which is a confidential communication between spouses. And fourth is the priest-confessor privileged information, which is a confession or spiritual guidance. So next is the sensitive personal information, which refers to personal information that requires extra protection about an individual's race, ethnic origin, marital status, age, color, and religious, philosophical, or political affiliations. Second is about an individual's health, education, genetic, or sexual life of a person, or to any proceeding for any offense committed or alleged to have been committed by such person, the disposal of such proceedings, or the sentence of any court in such proceedings. Third is issued by government agencies peculiar to an individual, which includes but not limited to social security numbers, previous or current health records, licenses or its denials, suspension or revocation and tax returns, and fourth, specifically established by an executive order or an act of Congress to be kept classified. So these categories highlight the importance of handling personal data with care and confidentiality. Scope of application. Data Privacy Act applies to the processing of all types of personal information and to any natural and juridical person involved in personal information processing, including those personal information controllers and processors who, although not found or established in the Philippines, use equipment that are located in the Philippines, or those who maintain an office, branch, or agency in the Philippines subject to the immediately succeeding paragraph. So in short, this law applies to anyone processing personal information in the Philippines, including local companies or businesses nga nag-operate here in the Philippines, foreign companies or companies outside the Philippines nga nag-use of equipment from the Philippines like servers or computers, and katong mga naay office or branches here sa Philippines. So, this act does not apply to the following. First is information about any individual who is or was an officer or employee of a government institution that relates to the position or function of individual, including the fact that the individual is or was an officer or employee of government institution, the title, business address, and office telephone number of the individual, and the classification, salary range, and responsibility of the position held by the individual, and the name of the individual on a document prepared by the individual in the course of employment with the government. Second is information about an individual who is or was performing service under contract for government institution that relates to the services performed, including the terms of the contract and the name of the individual given in the course of the performance of those services. And third, information relating to any discretionary benefit of a financial nature, such as the granting of a license or permit given by the government to an individual, including the name of the individual and the exact nature of the benefit. And fourth, personal information processed for journalistic, artistic, literary, or research purposes. Fifth, information necessary in order to carry out the function of public authority, which includes the processing of personal data for the performance of the independent, central, monetary authority and law enforcement and regulatory agencies of their constitutionally and statutorily mandated functions. So nothing in this act shall be construed as to have amended to repealed Republic Act Number 1405, otherwise known as the Secrecy of Bank Deposits Act, which protects bank deposits, Republic Act Number 6426, or otherwise known as the Foreign Currency Deposit Act, that governs foreign currency deposits, and Republic Act Number 9510, otherwise known as the Credit Information System Act, which regulates credit information. So next is the Data Privacy Principle. The processing of personal information shall be allowed subject to first, compliance with the requirements of the Data Privacy Act and other laws allowing disclosure or information to the public, and adherence to the following principles, which is first, principle of proportionality. The processing of personal data shall be adequate, relevant, suitable, necessary, and not excessive in relation to a declared and specified purpose. Meaning, ang i-collect lang and i-process lang nga personal data is katong mga necessary nga data. Dili na need mag-collect og extra information nga dili needed for a specific purpose. Next principle is the principle of legitimate purpose. The processing of personal data by the company shall be compatible with a declared and specified purpose which must not be contrary to law, moral, or public policy. So, when processing personal data, specify dapat sa company why data is being collected and processed. And of course, ensure that data use aligns with the declared purpose, and purpose should not violate laws, morals, or public policy. Third principle is the principle of transparency. So, the data subject must be aware. So, kita dapat aware ta of the nature, purpose, and extent of the processing of our personal data by the company, including the risk and safeguards involved, the identity of persons and entities involved in processing his or her personal data, his atong rights as a data subject, and how this can be exercised. Any information and communication relating to the processing of personal data should be easy to access and understand using clear and plain language. So, in short, ang company must be open and clear about the data processing. Personal information must be collected for a specified and legitimate purpose determined and declared before, or as soon as reasonably practicable after collection, and later processed in a way compatible with such declared, specified, and legitimate purposes only. Second is processed fairly and lawfully. Third, accurate, relevant, and where necessary for purposes for which it is to be used, the processing of personal information, keep up to date, inaccurate, or incomplete data must be rectified, supplemented, destroyed, or their further processing restricted. Fourth is adequate and not excessive in relation to the purposes for which they are collected and processed. Fifth, retained only for as long as necessary for the fulfillment of the purposes for which the data was obtained, or for the establishment, exercise, or defense of legal claims, or for legitimate business purposes, or as provided by law. And six, keep in a form which permits identification of data subject for no longer than is necessary for the purposes for which the data were collected and processed. Provide that personal information collected for other purposes may lie processed for historical, statistical, or scientific purposes, and in cases laid down in law may be stored for longer periods. Provide further that adequate safeguards are guaranteed by said laws authorizing their processing. So now, let's proceed to the criteria for lawful processing of personal information. So the processing of personal information shall be permitted only if not otherwise prohibited by law, and when at least one of the following conditions exists. So first condition is the data subject has given his or her consent, or the individual agrees to share their information. So example, nag-fill out ka form, then di ba sa ubos anan kanang nay nakabutang terms and conditions then nay nakabutang at if box din kung i-check nimo, meaning nag-agree na ka to share your personal information. Na siya. Next is the processing of personal information is necessary and is related to the following of a contract with the data subject, or in order to take steps at the request of the data subject prior to entering into a contract. So for example, a bank needs imo ang financial information para ma-process imo ang loan ingana para nang sa G loan kung kisa na naka-try, di ba gina-ask nila pila imo ang monthly income ingana para ma-process nila imo ang which is necessary para ma-process mo ang G loan. Third is the processing is necessary for compliance with a legal obligation to which the personal information controller is subject. So example, reporting kanang income for tax purposes. Then fourth, the processing is necessary to protect vitally important interest of the data subject including life and health. Example, medical records for emergency treatment. Then fifth is the processing is necessary in order to respond to national emergency to comply with the requirements of public order and safety or to fulfill functions of public authority which necessarily includes the processing of personal data for the fulfillment of its mandate like kanang law enforcement accessing data for investigation. And six, the processing is necessary for the purpose of the legitimate interest pursued by the personal information controller or by a third party or parties to whom the data is disclosed, except where such interests are overridden by fundamental rights and freedoms of the data subject which require protection under the Philippine Constitution. An example is kanang a company using customer data for marketing but not sharing it without consent. The following are the rights of the data subject. So, first is the right to informed consent. The data subject shall be informed whether personal information pertaining to him or her shall be or being or have been processed. So, kita, ako, or ikaw, since kita man ang data subject, you must be told how your personal information will be used before siya i-collect. So, example, ang company informs you kung unsa nga data ang ilang i-collect and why. Yan na siya. The following information must be provided before the entry of the personal information into the processing system or at the next practical opportunity. First is description of the personal information to be entered in the system, purposes for which they are being or are to be processed, and scope and method of the personal information processing, the recipients or classes of recipients to whom they are or may be disclosed, methods utilized for automated access if the same is allowed by the data subject and the extent to which such access is authorized, the identity and contract details of the personal information controller or its representative, the period for which the information will be stored, and the existence of their rights to access, example, to access, correction, as well as the right to lodge a complaint before the commission. Second right is the right to object. The data subject shall have the right to object to the processing of his or her personal data, including processing for direct marketing, automated processing, or profiling. So, you as a data subject, you can object to processing your data. Example, you can opt out of direct marketing emails. Yan na. The third right is the right to withhold consent. The data subject shall be notified and given an opportunity to withhold consent to the processing in case of changes or any amendment to the information supplied or declared to the data subject in the preceding paragraph. So, kita as a data subject, we have the right to refuse to give or consent or withdraw it later. Amendment of information. When a company wants to change how it handles personal data, it generally needs to notify the individual first. However, there are exceptions to this rule. For instance, notifications isn't required if the information is needed due to a legal subpoena or if the purpose of collecting and processing the data is of use, such as fulfilling the contract or employment obligations or complying with a legal duty. This balance allows companies to adapt while still protecting individuals' right to be informed about their personal data. So, next is the fourth right, which is the right to access. The data subject has reasonable access to, upon demand, the following. First is the content of his or her personal information that were processed. Second, sources for which personal information were obtained. Third, names and address of recipient of the personal information. Fourth, manner by which such data were processed. Fifth, reasons for the disclosure of the personal information to recipients. Sixth, information or automated processes where the data will or likely to be made as the sole basis for any decision significantly affecting or will affect the data subject. And seventh, the date when his or her personal information concerning the data subject were last accessed and modified. And eighth, the designation or name or identity and address of the personal information controller. The fifth right is the right to correction. You as a data subject have the right to correct any mistakes in your personal information. So, if ikaw nakita nga error, pwede ka mag-ask sa organization to fix it and they should do promptly if your request is reasonable. Next right is the right to erasure. You have the right to ask for your personal information to be deleted or removed if it's incorrect, outdated, or no longer needed. If you prove this, the organization should take action or the company should take action to erase your information and may also notify others who have received it. This helps para ma-protect atong privacy and ensure our data is handled properly. So, ika-7 nga right is the right to damages. The data subject shall be indemnified for any damages sustained due to such inaccurate, incomplete, outdated, false, unlawfully obtained, or unauthorized use of personal information. So, if someone mishandles your personal information, it's like, example, if it's incorrect, outdated, or used improperly, you can get compensation for any harm or losses you suffer. The last right is the right to data portability. The right of the data subject to obtain from the personal information controller copy of data where personal information is processed by electronic means and in a structured and commonly used format. You can request a copy of your personal information from the organization holding it, especially if it is stored electronically and in a common used format. This helps you to access and potentially transfer your data to another service. So, when a data subject or the person whose data is being processed is no longer able to exercise their rights due to death or incapacitation, their lawful heirs or assigns can step in to request access to the data subject information, correct errors in the data subject's information, request erasure or blocking of the data subject's information, and exercise other rights on behalf of the data subject. This ensures that the data subject's rights are still protected even if they can't act themselves, which is called the transmissibility of rights of the data subject. Non-applicability of these rights. So the above rights of a data subject are not applicable if the process personal information are used only for the needs of scientific and statistical research, and on the basis of such no activities are carried out and no decisions are taken regarding the data subject, provide that the personal information shall be held under strict confidentiality and shall be used only for declared purpose, and to processing of personal information gathered for the purpose of investigations in relation to any criminal, administrative, or tax liabilities of a data subject. In these cases, the data subject's right may be limited to allow for the investigation or research to proceed. However, this doesn't mean that data can be mishandled. There are still rules and safeguards in place to protect the data subject interest. So now let's proceed to the security of personal information. Duties and responsibilities of PIC or Personal Information Controller and PIP or Personal Information Processor is to implement reasonable and appropriate organizational, physical, and technical measures intended for the protection of personal information against any accidental or unlawful destruction, alteration, and disclosure, as well as against any other unlawful processing. Promptly notify the National Privacy Commission in case of breach or security incident. For the NPC, promptly in case of unauthorized access to personal information, data loss or theft, system hacking. Next is ensure employees, agents, or representatives involved in the processing shall operate and hold the personal information under strict confidentiality. Employees, agents, and representatives must keep personal information confidential, not share information without authorization. PIC also must ensure that third parties processing personal information on its behalf shall also provide security measures. Next is subcontracting. Subcontracting is when a PIC or Personal Information Controller hires a Personal Information Processor or PIP to process personal data on their behalf. So when a Personal Information Controller or PIC subcontracts data processing to a PIP, the PIC remains responsible for ensuring proper safeguards for personal data, follows Data Privacy Act requirements, and protect personal data's confidentiality and integrity. There should be contract or other legal act binding the PIC and PIP. Duration of contract between PIP and PIC. Obligation and rights of PIC clearly defines PIC's obligations and rights. Geographical location specify where data will be processed. Contract must include processed data only upon the document instruction of PIP. So specify the contract duration and PIP's obligation. Next is implement security measures. So PIP must implement security measures to protect personal information. Next is not engage in any other subcontracting without prior instruction from PIP or PIC. Next is delete or return to PIC at the end of agreement. PIP must delete or return personal information to PIC at the end of the agreement. So now let's proceed to data breach. A data breach is a security incident that leads to accidental or unlawful destruction, loss, alteration, unauthorized disclosure or access of unauthorized processing of personal data. Compromises the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of personal data or information. A data breach happens kung naay unauthorized access nga mahitabo or someone gets into your data without permission or data is compromised. Information is lost, stolen, or altered without permission. Example, the hacker steals customers' information from a company's database. Nga na, an employee accidentally shares sensitive data with the wrong person. Yung mga nga na, data breach can lead to identity thief. Someone will use your information for malicious purposes, nga na, or financial loss, money is stolen or compromised. O pwede po reputation damage, loss of trust in a company, loss of trust in a company or organization. So para ma-prevent ang data breach, you should use a strong password to protect your account. Be cautious online. Avoid ka ng mga suspicious nga links bitaw and emails. Dili pa ta og click sa mga link nga gipang send. Inga na. Keep software updated or fix security vulnerabilities. So next is the type of data breach. First, you have confidentiality breach. Due to the unauthorized disclosure of or access to personal information, protected information is accessed or disclosed without authorization. Example, a hacker steals customers' data from a company's database, as what I've said earlier. Next type is the integrity breach. Due to alteration of personal information. Information is altered or modified without authorization, like ang employee i-change ang address sa someone without permission. Nga na. Third is availability breach. Due to loss, accidental, or unlawful destruction of personal information. So, information is lost, destroyed, or becomes accessible. Example, a server crash result in lost customer data. So, when a breach occurs, it is essential to identify the breach first. I-determine nimo kung unsang nahitabo, what data was affected. Next is contain the breach or take steps to prevent further unauthorized access. Third, notify the affected parties, inform ang individual and authorities like NPC or National Privacy Commission as needed. Then fourth, review and improve. Analyze the breach and update security measures to prevent similar incidents nga possible mahitabo pa sa future. So how to handle breaches? So we need to implement security incident management policy. A security incident management policy is implemented by the PIC or PIP for the purpose of managing security incidents, including personal data breaches. Having a security incident management policy in place helps minimize harm and negative consequences, protect personal data and reputation, ensure compliance with laws and regulation, build trust with customers and stakeholders. A data breach must be reported to the NPC or National Privacy Commission if first, the personal information involves sensitive personal information or any other information that may be used to enable identity fraud. And second, there is a reason to believe that the information may have been acquired by an authorized person. And third, the unauthorized acquisition is likely to give rise to a real risk of serious harm to any affected data subjects. Contents, the following are the contents of notification. First is the nature of the breach, kung unsang nahitabo and how. Second, personal information involved, kung unsa type of information ang affected. Third, measures taken by the entity to address breach or mga steps nga gabuhaton to contain and fix the breach. Fourth, measures taken to reduce harm or consequences of breach or actions taken to minimize harm to affect individuals. Fifth, representative of PIC from whom the data subjects can inquire about the situation, or details of the PIC representative who can provide more information. 6. Assistance to be provided, support offered to affect individuals. And now let's proceed to data sharing agreement. It is a disclosure or transfer to a third party of personal data under the control or custody of the PIC. The disclosure or transfer may be done by a PIC or PIP upon instruction of the PIC. Excludes outsourcing, disclosure, or transfer of personal data by a PIC to a PIP. So, a data sharing agreement is a contract or agreement between two or more parties that outlines the terms and conditions for sharing personal data. A DSA helps ensure compliance with data protection laws and regulations, transparency or clear understanding of data sharing purposes and terms, and security of protection of personal data during sharing and transfer. So the following are the contents of data sharing agreement. First is purposes. Data sharing clearly defines why the data is being shared. Next is identity of PICs. Only personal information controller are parties to the DSA. Third, specifies the term or duration of DSA, which may be renewed as long as the purposes of the agreement continues to exist, which has term and its extensions shall not exceed 5 years. Next is overview of the operational details of the sharing or transfer of personal data, outlines how the data will be shared and transferred. And next is general description of security measures, describes the security measures in place to protect the data. So that ends my discussion about Data Privacy Act. Thank you.